There are moments in life when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking something much harder. How could the people who gave me life turn their backs on my children? I never imagined I'd have to look into my little girl's eyes and pretend everything would be okay, when I had no idea where our next meal would come from. But the hardest part wasn't being poor. It was knowing my parents had more than enough to help, and choosing not to. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of the day. I learned that sometimes strangers can love you more deeply than your own family. If you're listening to this, I only ask one thing. Don't judge anyone until you've heard the whole story, because the ending changed all of our lives. Growing up, I believed my parents were strong people. My father owned a successful construction company. My mother managed every detail of our household with military precision. We lived in a beautiful home where everything looked perfect from the outside. Inside, perfection came with conditions. Love was earned. Approval had to be deserved. Mistakes weren't lessons. They were disappointments. As a kid, I worked harder than anyone I knew just to hear my father say, "Good job." Most of the time, he simply nodded and walked away. My mother wasn't cold. She was distant. She believed emotions made people weak. Whenever I cried after falling off my bike or failing a test, she'd simply say, "Life won't stop because you're upset." Eventually, I stopped crying, at least where they could see me. Still, they were my parents, and children have a remarkable way of believing tomorrow will be different. Everything changed when I met Emily. She had this quiet kindness that made people feel safe. The first time we met, I was helping repair shelves at the community library where she volunteered. She smiled at me and asked if I needed help holding the ladder. I laughed. She laughed too. Somehow, that conversation lasted 3 hours. Emily didn't care how much money I made. She didn't care that I drove an old pickup truck or that my clothes usually smelled like sawdust after work. She cared about people. When I introduced her to my parents, I noticed something strange. They smiled. They were polite. But afterward, my father asked only one question. What does her family own? Not, is she kind? Not, does she make you happy? Just, what does her family own? When I told him her parents were retired school teachers, he simply nodded. I expected better. I tried to ignore it. Emily told me not to let it bother us. She believed people could change. I wanted to believe that too. We married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends who genuinely cared about us. My parents attended. They smiled for every photograph. Anyone looking at those pictures would think we were one happy family. Pictures don't capture silence. They don't capture the conversations that never happened, or the hugs that never came. 3 years later, our first daughter, Lily, was born. Holding her for the first time changed something inside me. I promised myself she would never wonder whether her father loved her. She would never have to earn affection. She would simply receive it. 2 years later, our second daughter, Grace, arrived. Our little house suddenly felt loud, messy, beautiful. There were toys on the floor, bedtime stories every evening, tiny shoes by the front door, and laughter that echoed through every room. We didn't have much money, but we had enough, or so we thought. Then life shifted. Emily became seriously ill. Not all at once. At first it was exhaustion, then appointments, then more tests. I drove her from one specialist to another, while trying to keep working. Enough hours to pay the bills. She never complained. Even on her hardest days, she'd smile at the girls and tell them Mommy was just tired. The medical expenses slowly swallowed our savings. Then they swallowed everything else. I sold my tools. I emptied my retirement account. I picked up night shifts after working all day. I barely slept. Still, it wasn't enough. One rainy evening, Emily held my hand from her hospital bed. "You need help," she whispered. "We'll figure it out," I replied. She gave me a sad smile. "No, you need to ask them." I already knew who she meant. For years, I had avoided asking my parents for anything. Not because they couldn't help, because I feared hearing the answer. Emily gently squeezed my hand. "Not for us," she said softly. "For Lily and Grace." That broke me. Not because she was asking, because she was right. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Nothing had changed. The flower beds were perfect. The windows sparkled. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. My father welcomed me into his office without standing. My mother poured herself tea without offering me any. For several minutes, we talked about the weather, The business. Anything except why I was there. Finally, I told them everything. Emily's illness, the medical bills, the girls, the mortgage we were about to lose. I wasn't asking for a gift, only a loan. I promised I'd repay every dollar. My father folded his hands and stared at me for a long time. My mother never looked up from her teacup. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then my father slowly leaned back in his chair. He exchanged a brief glance with my mother, and with an expression I couldn't read, he opened his mouth to answer. That single sentence would change the way I saw my parents forever. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. In fact, his expression was calm, almost thoughtful. Then he said 5 words that I will never forget. You made your own choices. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. I blinked. What? He folded his hands on the desk. You chose your wife. You chose your life. Now you have to live with those decisions. Every word landed heavier than the last. I looked toward my mother, hoping, praying she would interrupt him. She didn't. Instead, she quietly stirred her tea. Without looking at me, she said, We've warned you for years that emotions shouldn't guide major decisions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't come here asking you to solve my life, I said quietly. I'm asking you to help your granddaughters. The room fell silent. For just a second, my mother's eyes softened. She asked, How are the girls? Lily asks every night when Mommy will come home, I replied. Grace still thinks hospitals are magical places because they help people. I swallowed hard. They're just little girls. Neither of them spoke. Finally, my father stood and walked toward the large window overlooking his perfectly manicured lawn. I've built everything I own through discipline, he said. Not handouts. I stared at his back. I never asked for a handout. No? He turned around. You're asking me to rescue you from problems created by your own life. His words didn't sound cruel. They sounded rehearsed, like he had already decided long before I walked through the door. I took a slow breath. I'll repay every cent. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? He looked directly into my eyes. It's about responsibility. I almost laughed. Responsibility? For 6 years I had worked every day. I had cared for my wife, raised my daughters, paid every bill until there was nothing left to pay them with. If that wasn't responsibility, I didn't know what was. My mother finally looked up. We've already decided. My heart sank. There won't be a loan. The words echoed inside me. There won't be any financial assistance. I nodded slowly. Not because I accepted it, because my mind refused to believe it. I understand, I whispered. But I didn't. Not really. I stood from the chair. For a second, I thought someone might stop me. My mother might call my name. My father might reconsider. Neither happened. I walked to the front door alone. As I reached for the handle, I heard my father one last time. Daniel. I turned. For one impossible moment? I hoped. Instead, he said, You should consider selling your house before the bank forces you to. That was it. No hug. No, how's Emily? No, give the girls our love. Just financial advice. I nodded once. Then I walked away. Outside, I sat inside my old truck for nearly 20 minutes. I couldn't start the engine. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wasn't crying because they refused the money. I was crying because I finally understood something I'd spent my entire life avoiding. They had never loved me the way I loved them. When I arrived at the hospital, Emily immediately knew. You asked them. I nodded. She searched my face for a moment. Then she reached for my hand. They said no. I couldn't answer. She squeezed my fingers. I'm sorry. I looked at her in disbelief. You're apologizing? She smiled through tired eyes. I know how much it hurts. She knew. She always knew, even when I tried to hide it. Over the following months, life became a series of impossible choices. Pay the electric bill, or buy medication, fix the leaking roof, or replace Lily's worn-out shoes. Every dollar mattered. Every decision carried guilt. But somehow, we kept moving. Neighbors quietly left groceries on our porch. A teacher paid for Grace's school trip without telling anyone. My best friend Michael began stopping by every weekend. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes it was food. Sometimes it was toys the girls had admired. Sometimes he simply showed up with coffee and helped repair things around the house. I'll pay you back, I'd always tell him. He'd laugh. You already have. How? You've been my brother since we were 12. That's what loyalty sounds like. Not speeches. Presence. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Michael looked at me carefully. Your parents still haven't called? I shook my head. Not once. He looked down, then quietly said something that stayed with me. People reveal who they really are when helping costs them something. At the time, I thought he meant money. Years later, I'd realize he meant something much bigger. Time passed. Slowly, painfully, life began to change. Emily recovered little by little. I found steadier work, then a better opportunity. One promotion became another. Our tiny house was saved. The girls grew. Lily became the kind of teenager who volunteered at shelters. Grace inherited her mother's gentle heart and never left home. Without making someone smile, our lives weren't perfect, but they were peaceful. One evening, nearly 8 years after I walked out of my parents' house, Lily came running inside holding the mail. Dad! She handed me a cream-colored envelope. There are 2 people at the front door asking for you. I smiled absent-mindedly as I opened the envelope. Then I heard a voice from outside. Older, weaker, almost unfamiliar. Daniel. I froze. Slowly, I walked toward the door. Through the glass, I saw them. My father, my mother. The same people who had turned away when my daughters needed them most, only now. Their shoulders were slumped. Their confident expressions were gone. And before I could say a single word, my father lowered his eyes and quietly said, "We need your help."